I recently created a video where I demystified the process of creating a custom frame for Canva, showing just how easy it actually is, so I can link that above. But that led to a follow-up question. What if you want to create a photo collage where you actually want to put multiple pictures into multiple frames? How would you do that? And what about rotation? What if you want something specifically rotated and you don't want to have to redo that rotation anytime you add a new picture? In other words, it's an asset you want to reuse again and again. You want to save as much time as possible. Well, we're going to go over all that today. I'm going to show you just how easy it is. I'm going to make sure you're all set up so you can maximize your time. All right, let's get into it. If I look through the 3 different pages in this Canva document, you'll see I have Canva frames, which essentially are all the same shape. However, you can probably tell that they all have something a little different going on. And if you want to really understand custom frames and how you can set them up to your advantage, let's make sure you understand how all of these were set up and how they're going to work. So let's jump back to this first page, and we'll notice if I drag this in here, the photo snaps into all the frames. This is actually one frame. It just looks like it's divided apart into sections, but it's actually going to act as one frame. Now, if I go over to this next page and look at these frames, okay, all the photos go into these separate frames. So these are all separate frames, but we'll notice they're all going in oriented straight up and down. Now, if I jump to this third frame, now all of a sudden, if I drag over top of each frame element here, then suddenly I'll see that the picture itself is actually being oriented based on the wedge of the circle, the direction that it's pointed. So 3 frames that looked very much the same in terms of shape, but they're all acting quite differently, okay? And if you wanted something like this, it would save you a lot of time not having to rotate that photo every time, because if I come over to this frame and suddenly say, hey, I want to rotate this photo, so you can double click on a photo like this, and we can come in here and say, let's rotate that to -45. Okay, we could do that. We could reposition it. We have it all set. But now suddenly if I add a new photo, suddenly I drag it in, I lose the rotation. I don't want to redo that work all over again. So let's jump over to Photopea and look at how I made each of these custom frames, because understanding that is going to be the key to really executing your own creative ideas. Now, I have done a custom frame tutorial before on how I do it in Photopea, so if you want to see that, I'll do a link above. But we're also going to go over the process again in this video. So let's jump over to Photopea and check it out now. Okay, so now we're inside of Photopea, and of course this is just photopea.com, and this is their free photo editor. So what I've done is I just started a project here with a square format, and what I'm going to do now is add a layer. So I'll add a layer here using this icon in the layer menu, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to choose this ellipse marquee, and then as I drag out here, I'm going to hold down the Alt key so it'll draw the ellipse from the center outward, and I'm also going to hold down the Shift key so it'll draw a exact circle. So that Shift key constrains my ratios, and that Alt key is what's allowing me to drag out from the center outward. And then when I release this, it's just going to make a selection. So all I did was make a selection of a circle here, and once I have that selection, I can just fill it with a color, and black is currently my foreground color, so I'm just going to hit Alt backspace, and then suddenly we have this circle here, and it's selected currently. You can see the marching ants. I can hit Control D if I want to get rid of that current selection, and now I just have a circle on screen here. Now essentially what I do is I want to slice this up, but what I'm going to do is just start by making some rectangles now. So again, I'm just going to switch between the ellipse to this rectangle marquee and use that to make a selection now. Now there are lots of different tools for making selections here inside of Photopea, and so as you experiment around, getting to know these different selection tools is going to be part of the process for you. But I'm just keeping it real simple now, so we're just going to use this marquee now. What I'm going to do now is basically draw just a little thin rectangle, because I want to slice this circle up ever so slightly. So I'm going to do something like that, make sure it's wider than my circle, then I'm going to release it. Again, I have a selection. Before I fill this selection, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come above this layer because I want to put it on a new layer. So I hit this little layer icon, and now I have a new layer above the existing layer. And now, since this layer is selected, again, I will fill, but this time I'm going to fill with my background color. So again, you could go under the fill menu up here. So in other words, you could go, let's see, you could go edit, fill, and fill with a color. So you could fill with foreground or background. I tend to just use my keyboard shortcuts, because I know Alt backspace fills with the foreground color, and I know that Control backspace on Windows or Command backspace on a Mac will fill with my background color. So now we have that filled with white. Now when I have that filled and selected there, what I'm going to do is first I want to make sure these two are centered together. So I have this layer selected, but then I'm going to Control click and click on my other layer so both of these layers are selected now. And when they're both selected, I can come up here, select this sort of move icon here. So select this first one, the move tool. And then what I'm going to do is make sure that these are both aligned in terms of their centers. So I'll click this one here, center horizontally. I'm going to click this one here to center vertically. And I'm just making sure that I have that sort of new shape that I've drawn, this rectangle, centered exactly under my circle, over my circle I should say. So now it's dividing that circle exactly in half. So what I'll do now is I'll click, so I'm just on this layer just to deselect for a second, and I'll come back to layer 2. So now I have layer 2 selected, and I see the transform controls. Now, if you don't see the transform controls, you may not have this selected up here. So you can turn this on and off based on whether you want to see those transform controls automatically. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. But anyways, with the move tool, and you're on this layer with the rectangle, we're going to make sure transform controls is selected this time. And I'm actually going to rotate this. But actually before I rotate it, I have a step I have to do. I want to make a copy of this layer. So we could left click on it and we could do something like duplicate layer. So that's with the, excuse me, I said left click, right click. You could right click and choose duplicate layer. There's also a keyboard shortcut that's helpful to know. So with any layer selected, you could hit Control J on your keyboard. Again, that's on Windows, Command J on Mac, and we've duplicated that layer. So now we have a copy. Could have done it with that right click contextual menu also, but I like to use that Control J keyboard shortcut. Now that we have that done and we have transform control selected, with this new copy of this, I'm going to rotate this one 90 degrees. Now when you're rotating something, if you want to constrain sort of the rotation to sort of 15-degree increments, you can hold down the shift key as you rotate. So to rotate something, just move your cursor until you get close to the outside of these controls here, and you'll see this little arrow. You see how it turned into this curved black arrow. Now it's going to allow me to rotate. But before I start to left click with my mouse button to rotate, I'm going to hold down the shift key. So I'm holding down the shift key, and then I'm holding down my left mouse button. So shift, hold down my left mouse button, and now as I drag it, you'll notice it only can move in 15-degree increments, and that's because I have that shift key held down. So that makes it very easy to get it exactly 90 degrees rotated. And then I'm just going to release my left mouse button, release my shift key, and now I have that shape. So essentially all I've done with these different shapes here is divide this up so that I have these little wedges, right? So now my circle is actually divided into 4 different regions, 4 different triangle areas, if you will. Now, I no longer need these all to be separate layers. I just needed that to sort of set this up. But now what I can do is collapse all these down together. So another keyboard shortcut to do something like that is select all the layers you want to collapse. So I'm going to do this one. I'm going to shift click down this one, and I'm going to use the Control E keyboard shortcut, and that's going to collapse them all down together. Okay, selected them all. And then Control E on my keyboard, that's on Windows, that'd be Command E on Mac, and now I've collapsed them all together, and now this is one layer. Now I've done all this in Photopea, but it's worth mentioning at this point, I could have done this in Canva, I could have done this in other software. It doesn't really matter how you do it, you just want to end up with something now in Photopea where I can easily select the regions where I'm going to want to have photos, where I'm going to want them to act as frames. So we want to get to this point. Okay, how you do it doesn't matter, but we want to get to this point where we have something where we can easily select the regions where we are going to want photos to go. So now what I can do, since it's on one layer, I can come down here and I can use this magic wand tool, and I can come in here and I can start to select the black areas. Now this is where this contiguous option up here is going to be very important. So if I turn off contiguous and I select the black with this magic wand here, tolerance is level of 5, so that's obviously going to select the black areas and not the white areas, but it's selecting all the black areas because I do not have contiguous turned on. Now let me hit Control D and you'll notice my marching ants go away. So Control D to deselect something. And then I'm going to again use my magic wand. And with a magic wand, again, you're clicking on an area of color and it's selecting that color and other areas of that color. Now, the more you increase this tolerance, the more it's going to select close colors, colors that are close in tone. But you can leave that as 1, and this is all black, and it would still select it. Okay, but the contiguous, if you turn that on, then suddenly it's only going to select things that are directly adjacent and touching. Okay, so now since these areas are separated by the white, now I can click on any different wedge, and it's going to select only that wedge. Now, you'll notice here I selected something and then I selected something else and it stayed selected. I can select something else and it selects that and this stays selected. That's because right now up here I have the Unite option turned on here. If I were to suddenly go over here and do this Replace option, then suddenly I can click on one of these and you'll notice the other selections go away and I'm making a new selection each time. So this is just something to be aware of. As you select any of the tools here inside of Photopea, it's just like it is in Photoshop, where you're going to have a contextual menu up here with some important options related to that tool. Okay, but we're getting away from what we wanted to come in here and do, so let's just return to how we're going to set up these frames. So if you've watched my Photopea custom frame tutorial before, you know there are a couple of simple steps. Step one is make the selection. So right now, let's turn off this contiguous. Let's just start with the whole thing. So click once, I've made a selection. So that's step one. Step two, you remember we come to our paths menu. We're going to go over here. We're going to find this selection to path option. We're going to click on that. When you do that, you'll notice those marching ants turn into this blue outline. Now you might not be able to see that blue outline so well right now, but if I come under the layers menu here, turn off that layer for a second, you'll see, yes, we do have that blue outline. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that selection, that path that we have now, into a vector mask. But before I do, let's just come up, new layer, and then again, Alt backspace to fill it with black. And I'm just doing this so we have a visual reference of what each of our vector masks is going to be. So now we have this, and I'll just go up here under the layer menu, and we'll go vector mask, and we'll go current path, okay? So 3 steps. Make your selection, then go under the path menu and turn that selection into a path, and then take that path and turn that path into a vector mask. Okay, those are the 3 steps. Final step is going to be exporting it back into Canva, which we'll talk about in a second. But before we do that, let's go ahead and select just the individual wedges. Because right now, if we look at this frame here, we can see that's the entire thing. That's going to come in Canva and act as one frame. If we want it to act as separate frames, so we almost have a frame collage where we can put different images in different frames, then we have to select these wedges separately. Okay, so let's do that real quick. So I'm going to turn off this one temporarily. Let's just come back here to this layer. Again, magic wand tool. This time we will turn on contiguous. So I'll select this one here. So let me hit Control D because I was on the wrong layer. Let me make sure I'm on this layer. Let me come down here, magic wand tool, click on one of these wedges, and then we'll jump over real quick to the paths. We'll go and we'll do this selection to path, and then we'll come back to our layer. And we're going to go and we're going to go ahead, Alt backspace, fill this with black. And then we're going to go layer and we're going to go once again, vector mask, current path. Okay. And so now we can see that I have it for this wedge. And then I also have it for all 4 of them together. Now I'm going to do the last 3 wedges individually. I'll speed up the video so you don't have to watch me do that, but I'm doing the exact same process where I'm just selecting a wedge, turning it into a path, and then turning it into a vector mask. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've turned all the different wedges into vector mask. So if we look here, if I turn off this one layer here, let me just turn on these layers individually. So up top here, we have the vector mask that's all of them together. And then we have the one that's the top left. We have the top right. We have the bottom right, and we have the bottom left, okay? So I'll go ahead and turn all of these on now, and these are what we are going to export back to Canva. So if you remember, if you watched my other video, what do you have to do once you have these vector masks? You have to export it as a PDF, and you have to make sure you have certain things turned off. So we have all these things selected now. We're going to go File, we're going to go Export as PDF, and we're going to go ahead and make sure all these boxes are not checked. So don't check anything, make sure they're all turned off. Then we're going to save. We're going to save this as PDF. I will call this Circle Wedges. It's going to be a PDF, and we'll go ahead and save that off now. Okay, now we have that. Now we're going to import it into Canva, and since we saved it off with all these different versions of these frames, we're going to have that in Canva. So let's go take a look at that now. So here I am back on my Canva home screen. Now I could upload that PDF that I just created using this button, but just off my screen here, I have on my Chrome browser a spot where I can see my recent downloads, and you can also drag things directly off on the screen here. You could do it with File Explorer or something else as well, but I'm just going to go up here, find that circle wedges and drag it down because that's going to save a little time, and then boom, we'll see it come into Canva right here. It's going to process that. It's only going to take a couple seconds, and then I can go ahead and open it. Now we're just seeing everything stacked on top of each other, but we know we should have multiple frames here. So if I come under the position menu, I'll see, yes, I have that full version here, and then I have the different wedges. And I actually had the template that I created with, which I brought back in. Also, I could have deleted that in Photopea. I didn't need to bring that back, but I had it in my file still, so it brought it back. But let's go ahead and delete that one there and just get rid of that layer altogether. And now let's look at these individually. So if we start with this top layer here, then I should be able to detach the image. And yes, I can. So I can throw out that image and we can see that, yes, I have a frame there. And then let's just bring these wedges on top one at a time. And we'll see that if I go ahead and detach image here, yes, I have a frame there as well. And let's just make this one transparent so we can see that, yes, that is just an individual frame. So it's worked. We have these different individual frames, but now let's talk about how we're going to make use of these. So what I'm going to do here is let me turn this back up so we can see what it is. Let's take this one, let's bring it behind. Let's select all of these, just individual wedges. So I'm gonna hit Control X to copy them. We'll create a new page and we'll just paste them on there. So now we have these on the different pages just to check and make sure how these work. Okay, so if we come under the Elements tab here, we can drag a picture in here, then see, yes, this is working the way we expect. This one that's unified is acting as one frame. It's taking one photo, but then if we go to the second page and we look at our wedges, and we go ahead and now we fool around with this, we see, okay, yes, this is acting as separate frames, and so that works successfully as well. But what about the other version we had in that example that we started with? What about this page right here? How do we create something like this? Well, in Canva, we can go ahead and rotate. So if I come back to that one we're working on now, you can come in here, you can double click, you can come in here, you can rotate the photo. So I could do this with all these photos, but as I mentioned in the intro, then when I go ahead and drag something new in, then suddenly I'm losing that rotation. It seems like it's keeping it there, but those models were actually just at an angle. It's not actually keeping that rotation. Just to do a dramatic example here, let's come in here. Let's really rotate something so it's directly sideways. We can see when I drag another photo in, I lose that. I lose that rotation. So if you want to have a template where you have that rotation built in, you have to think about how you're going to rotate it, how many degrees you're going to rotate, and you got to factor that in when you export from Photopea or whatever program you're creating your frame in, right? Because you have to have something oriented in such a way that when you then bring it into Canva and maybe you rotate it in Canva, suddenly it's going to make sense. Now, I think all this is going to make better sense with the example. So let's think about this example. Essentially, we want this one rotated sort of minus 45 degrees, right? Because this would be minus 90. So the wedge itself, if it's going to be centered this way, that's going to be minus 45. This one is essentially rotated 45 degrees. And then if we do 45 plus 90 to get this, essentially this is 135. Going the other direction, minus 45, minus another 90, minus 135. Okay, so we basically know the angles that we want these rotated at. So that's something that's going to have to come in play now as we jump over into Photopea. But another way to think about this is essentially we always want this to be the bottom point, and then the photo is going to be straight up from the point to the center of the other side. Okay, so let's jump over to Photopea now and see how we're going to do this. Okay, here I am back in that same Photopea project. Now I have a bunch of my layers turned off now, but we only need to work with one wedge here because we're only going to need one wedge for this. So you can see right now there's a blue bounding box around the entire screen. Well, that's because I have this layer selected. Remember, the whole layer is filled with black. I actually want to select the wedge itself. So I'm going to left click directly on the vector mask. And now with the transform controls turned on, now you notice I have this bounding box just around the masked area itself, which is what we want. Okay, so now what do we want to do? Well, we want to rotate this so that the point is at the bottom, and then this is oriented upwards. So what I actually have to do is rotate this wedge 45 degrees, because remember, we want to bring it in so something shows straight up and down, and this wedge And then as we rotate the wedge in there, it's going to maintain that and it's going to work the way we want. You're going to see as we work through this example. So I need to rotate this. Now remember, we can hold down the Shift key and rotate 15 pixels at a time. So you move your cursor until just outside here. But if I do that now, it's going to rotate around this central point. Well, you can actually come in here and you can actually change the rotation point. Now, I wouldn't have to do this, but I like to do this sometimes just to make rotation easier. So what I can actually do is click that and drag that, and I can drag it to the bottom corner. And you can see that reflected in this diagram right here. Instead of in the center now it is in the bottom corner. And that becomes now the point of rotation, the axis of rotation, if you will. So now if I come up here and now I wait until I get that cursor, I hold down my Shift key, then I start to rotate. Suddenly you're rotating around that point, and then when you're done you can go ahead and click on that again to commit your changes, and now suddenly we have this shape rotated. Now, because we know our photo is going to go straight up and down, now suddenly the point's going to be at the bottom, the photo is going to be up here right in the center of this curve, which is what we want. So this should be the shape of frame that we want. Now I don't care about any of these other frames, so I could throw the rest away, but when they're turned off, I don't think they're going to get brought over. It's only going to be what we have turned on. So what I'm going to do now is with this layer, I'll just do the same. I'll go File, I'll go Export As. Once again, we'll do this as a PDF. Once again, you want to make sure that we have this saved. Now, we didn't do all the steps we did before because remember, we already have this as a vector mask, right? So we already have done the steps. All we were doing now was rotating it, okay? But if you're starting from scratch, of course, you'd have to do those steps, make a selection, convert it to a path, and then convert that path to a vector mask. But since we have that now, we're just going to come in here. We're going to save this, make sure nothing is checked. We're saving as a PDF. Sure, this all sounds good. And I'll call this one a rotated wedge, something so that I know what it is. And now we're going to jump back into Canva and we're going to see how this allows us to suddenly do what we want. Okay, so here we are back inside of Canva. I'll just go ahead and I will find that rotated wedge we just created. Again, drag that on screen so we start to import that PDF. We're going to go ahead and bring that in. We see it flash. We can right click on it. We can detach image just to see we have this frame now. So now suddenly I have this frame where if I bring a photo in now, it's going to snap into the photo frame here. So let's just go under elements. Let's bring one of these in. We can see, okay, it's snapping it in there. But then suddenly if I rotate this frame, then we can see suddenly we're going to start to get what we want. So now we remember we rotated this 45 degrees. So let's take this frame here and let's go ahead and position this, and we'll go under rotation. We'll call -45. So now suddenly we've rotated it back to how it was at that -45 degrees. Now let's drag it down. Let's Alt create a copy. With this copy, what are we going to do this one? Well, this one, instead of -45, let's do it 45 degrees. So suddenly there's the other half of the circle. We could position it something like that. Now let's take both of these together. Let's go ahead and drag out some copies. And again, this one here, what do we want to do with this one? Well, let's make this one -135. Testing out our math skills here. Let's make this one 145, or actually 135. 135. And now let's just take these bottom two here. Let's select the bottom two and let's nudge them up until we have things positioned the way we want. And then if we want, we could group these all together. But now you notice if we save this as a template, suddenly we have these oriented because we brought them in a certain way. Now we have them oriented where we can come in here and suddenly we can add pictures, and suddenly those pictures are rotating the way we intended because we did all that work up front, okay? So do you always want to do this? Not necessarily, because maybe you're fine. If we go back through the other examples here, let's find the other ones. Maybe sometimes you want it like this, or maybe sometimes you want one photo in one frame, okay? So here's one where one photo, one frame, or maybe you want them oriented like this. But if you do want them oriented like this here, then you got to take that extra step. You have to understand how Photopea is working, how Canva is working together, and you have to take that extra step so you get something set up the way you want. Now, the reason why you would spend this extra time, because if you were going to use this template again and again and again on social media or something, and you always want to orient them like this, then those 5 minutes, 10 minutes you spend up front are going to end up saving you hours, because you're not going to have to do this double click, crop, rotate every time you drag in new photos. you know, when you're using that this asset again and again. Okay, so I hope you learned something. Again, custom frames in Canva, very easy to make with Photopea, and you can get them to act the way you want just if you understand how Photopea and Canva are working together, and you understand the steps you need to take up front just to set things up the way you want them to, so they're going to work the way you want them to. So the takeaway points just for review, it's going to matter greatly how you set up your frame here in Photopea, because of course if you have something like this where the entire vector mask is sort of one mask, so this is, even though these aren't touching, this is one mask, so that mask is going to come into Photopea and hold one photo. Contrastingly, if you have a bunch of different masks here, like this, each of these are individual shapes, individual vector masks, and so when you bring those into Photopea, again, they're going to be their own mask. And then the final takeaway point is, it's going to bring a photo into this frame based on the orientation of what your mask orientation is here in Photopea. So if you do have something where you want to have some sort of rotation that's always applied, and you don't have to redo that using that rotation feature in Canva, you just want it to be set up and work correctly, then you may have to do some creative thinking. You may have to think about how you're going to orient that here in Photopea, and then in your template in Canva, you may have to do some sort of rotation just so you can save the most time going forward in your workflow. And of course, we did a pretty simple example here with just a circle divided into wedges, but you could take this method we're talking about here and extrapolate it out to more complicated projects. Really anything you want, just remember these rules about one vector mask in here equals one mask inside of Canva, okay? Okay, thanks for watching. If you learned something, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.